Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, the way 2020 has been going, we just have monumental headlines, crazy things happening all the time. And with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we're going to see even more craziness as we ramp up to this election.
Yeah, who would have expected this 6 weeks before the election? I don't think anybody was expecting it, including a lot of liberals who are just having an absolute meltdown. You saw some of them. I don't know if you saw that TikTok video of that lady. Of course, we can't play that for you on the show because she can't, speak in an adult manner, or at least in a manner that we can broadcast over the airwaves here. But she was having an absolute meltdown, and we'll get to some of that a little bit later in the show, as well as some of the details, because, if you're following the news, they're telling you, this is absolutely impossible that you could have a confirmation in 45 days. It takes a minimum of 75 to 90, maybe 120 days to do this. And we'll tell you how they're misleading you on that fact. We'll go through some of the I pulled the records from the Senate, on the confirmations historically of Supreme Court justices. And there's going to be too many examples even to read to you that are just going to blow your mind how quickly some of these people have been confirmed.
Abraham Lincoln waited. That far back?
Well, all right, Pat George. Don't mess up my train of thought here now. Come on. I've got all these examples. In all seriousness, I've got a bunch of examples of these folks being confirmed very quickly, and we'll cover all that a little bit later in the show. When we get to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg segment of the show, which is going to be, I think, one of our main topics, we've also got a great out there for you, probably one of the few completely unsolved UFO incidents in history, extremely well documented, and even skeptics say they really don't have a good explanation. In fact, the best explanation the skeptics have is it was some kind of experimental military aircraft. That's how well documented and how strange this particular sighting was in Australia back in the 60s. So we got some great clips on that for you in the Out There segment. But before we get to that, we got a lot to cover in the meantime. So we wanted to start by taking a quick look back at the riots that have been occurring across this country over the past 4 or 5 months, which have been really pretty tragic overall, what's happened in this country in terms of the number of lives disrupted, businesses destroyed, innocent people harmed, some of them killed, some of them just beat up pretty severely, their property damaged. I saw some further incidents of this over the weekend where they had a announced Proud Boys event, which actually nobody went to. None of the Proud Boys went to, apparently, but all the Antifa people showed up ready for a fight. And because there were no Proud Boys around, they ended up fighting some with each other, busting up some of their own cars and other things like that. But importantly, there's a study out by Princeton University's U.S. Crisis Monitor that shows that the U.S. has experienced 637 riots between May 26th and September 12th. And 91% of those are associated with the BLM movement. So 9 out of 10. And you might be saying, well, wait a minute, this is just some conservative spin. You're calling what's a peaceful protest a riot. Well, actually, stop. No, we're not. And we're not even doing it. It's Princeton University, right? I mean, they've got to be pretty darn liberal, you would think. I mean, okay, so they define riots as demonstrations in which any demonstrators engage in violent, disruptive, or destructive acts, as well as mob violence, in which violent mobs target other individuals, property, businesses, or other groups. So there have been 637 of those. This is not counting the peaceful protests, of which there have also been probably many more than that. This is violent riots. 49 states, not including Washington, D.C., have experienced these riots, with California having the most at 86 and Oregon having 79. And, of course, this is through September 12th, and we saw even some more of these types of things, including more riots in Portland over the weekend. Looks like we've got a caller already. Ed, welcome to the Morgan Streetman Show.
Hey, how you doing this morning? Just wanted to get your views on this RBG appointment and what you thought. Should the president make an appointment during the remaining during his remaining term?
Well, why not, Ed? I mean, isn't that his obligation under the Constitution to fill the seat? And
Seems like it is.
I mean, there's no constitutional basis to wait. Now, I've heard people arguing about this, that, or the other, about what happened to Merrick Garland. And, I guess if politics were fair and if everything was equal, then maybe they'd have an argument. But after the last 4 years, after what they've done to President Trump over the last 4 years, how they've misused the investigatory process, the special counsel that was appointed, how they had the impeachment, and they basically ran roughshod over the Republicans. I mean, we can just think of hearing after hearing where they've had Republican people in, including Attorney General William Barr, and they've run roughshod over him. You remember reclaiming my time? They wouldn't even let the man speak. He's the Attorney General of the United States. So since when do the Democrats ever show any fairness or consideration to the Republicans? Since when do they try to avoid hypocrisy or anything like that? It's not a concern for them at all. They do whatever is most politically expedient for themselves at the time. And so if those are the rules, and remember what they did to Brett Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh, I mean, that complete circus that they pulled on him. So if those are the rules that they've set for the game, then this is not even a major issue. We should just proceed with the appointment. The president should appoint someone. Hopefully the Senate can come to a vote on that before the election. If not, maybe they can do it shortly after the election. They could certainly begin the hearing process in the time that we've got between now and the election. And this is a great issue for Republicans. I mean, Republicans are fired up about the Supreme Court. And President Trump has a chance to leave such a lasting impact with the people that he's already appointed. And this next appointment, they say it could change the balance of the court. Now, of course, we don't know until the court starts voting on things because some of the people who are appointed, they tend to get their own ideas once they get that black robe and that title justice or maybe even chief justice. They tend to start to get some of their own ideas about how they want to vote on things, and they don't really necessarily follow what might have been expected of them as justices or the chief justice once they're put into that position. But at least we can hopefully get an originalist, a constitutionalist, someone who's conservative, somebody who believes in the rule of law. It was said by Joe Biden on Friday night about Ruth Bader Ginsburg that she used her position on the Supreme Court to change the law in this country. And if that's what you think a Supreme Court justice is supposed to do, then we just have a fundamental disagreement about what the role of the court is. It's the role of the legislature to make the laws and to change the laws when necessary. It's the role of the court to interpret the laws as the legislature writes them. That's why we have the three branches of government. That's why we have the separation of powers. These are important concepts that underlie our constitutional system. And what the Democrats want to do generally is whatever's politically expedient for their political purposes, including putting justices on the court who want to change the law if they don't like what the Congress has passed. What do you think, Ed?
I think that you're on the right track. My only issue and concern is that a lot of Republican senators in the past who are leaders in the Senate and Congress generally have said, no appointments during a presidential election, no appointments in the last 3 months of a year, and so on.
Right. Well, you're talking about Lindsey Graham. Remember, he said, use my words against me. And now he's finding that they are going to use those words against him. But what he said over the weekend was that for him, Kavanaugh changed everything. The whole process with Kavanaugh changed everything. And that's the point that I think needs to come home to these Republicans. We've got already Senator Lisa Murkowski, Senator Susan Collins, both saying that either they won't do a vote or that they don't believe that a vote should occur before the election, and that it should be whatever president wins the election that makes the nomination to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's spot. They're already boxing themselves in. They're saying this is not fair, this is hypocritical, etc. And that's why I kind of went on my little rant just a few minutes ago The point is, when have the Democrats ever applied that standard to themselves? And we all know, anybody that's been watching politics closely over the last 4 years knows they haven't. They haven't applied any standard of fairness or trying not to be hypocritical. They've done whatever they wanted to do when they were in power. And now that the tables are turned, I think turnabout is fair play. Well, thanks very much for the call, Ed. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Ruth Bader Ginsburg vacancy and the coming appointment a little bit later in the show. Well, we got a few other things to cover for you folks. Before we get to that, we'll be right back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Usually we do our story, a quick look back. We went through that. And how about our local interest story, Morgan? I've got to tell you what's happening.
Yeah, I heard some crazy stuff going on here in St. Pete.
Yes. Just after 6 a.m. this morning, there was a car fire that was discovered on the Pinellas Trail, so around 22nd Avenue. So St. Pete. Firefighters responded, police responded, and they discovered a body in the trunk of that car that was on fire. And the body is too badly burned to determine the individual's gender or race.
Oh, my goodness. Gosh, that almost sounds like a scene out of Goodfellas or something.
It does. It does.
Wow.
I mean,
well, there must be much more to that story.
Yes, that's just the beginning of that story.
Yeah. Sounds like somebody drove a person to an area, maybe executed them, put them in the trunk, or maybe they were... Anyway, goodness gracious.
Right. And then went to the Pinellas Trail.
Wow.
So.
You just wonder what's behind some of that, you know? I mean, it's just so... I tell you, it's so foreign to so many of us that are just, normal, law-abiding citizens. That's why so many people love the true crime movies and the true crime stories and based on real movies, because it's hard to even imagine, how these scenarios come about. It's just so foreign to most of us in most of our lives day to day. And, it's hard to imagine the scenario where Joe Biden is actually running for president at this point in his life, given all the gaffes that he's making. Let's face it, folks, the guy seems to be entering the middle stages of dementia. He now can't even really read a teleprompter. They certainly can't put him on any kind of unscripted media appearance. He doesn't take questions, if you notice that, after every speech. Boy, he grabs those papers and starts running, and sometimes he even starts running the wrong way, and he has to turn around and run back. But, I'm just amazed if you saw what happened this weekend, and we've got a clip that I want to play because, there's a couple of things you could have seen recently. That was when he appeared in Tampa last week to a very small group and talked about how if you were a quartermaster, you could run a women's clothing department on the second floor, and everybody's kind of scratching their heads going, what the heck is he talking about? Most people are saying, what is a quartermaster? Okay, now some of us knew what he's talking about. He's saying if you were a military person who is quartermaster's in charge of, material and stuff, depending on what their specific role is, they're in charge of the movement of goods and things in the military. But obviously he's saying you could then run a women's clothing department, although it's kind of a non sequitur. And, of course, we recently saw when he gave a speech, and at the beginning of it, he pulled out his record player, his iPhone, and he started playing Despacito. Remember that? And that was a joke, by the way, because remember, he thinks the record player is what you still have at home. So he's just making gaffe after gaffe. Well, here's another gaffe that he made recently where he talks about the number of people who have died from COVID. And let's just face it, he's obviously not reading his teleprompter correctly. He's adding 3 more zeros to his number.
And perhaps, most cruelly of all, if Donald Trump has his way, the complications from COVID-19, which are well beyond what they should be. It's estimated that 200 million people have died, probably by the time I finish this talk.
So it's basically wiped out 2/3 of our country, right? Doesn't that, you don't think it even hits him as he's saying it. That's how not there Joe Biden is when he's giving a speech.
Thursday night.
Well, we'll see.
He knows it's a big number, so he just went with a big number.
He just saw the 2 and a bunch of zeros, and he's like, 200 million, as opposed to 200,000, had to be what was on his teleprompter. But the point is, he's sitting there talking, and it doesn't even occur to him. He doesn't think, well, wait a minute, what I just said doesn't make any sense. 200 million people, there's only about 330 million people in the entire country. Has it killed 2/3 of our country? No. Maybe I need to stop there and say, I'm sorry, I misspoke, 200,000. But it doesn't even occur to Joe Biden. And this is what we're seeing with him over and over again. He's just reading from the teleprompter. Now, another funny story kind of related to Joe Biden recently. It's not that funny because it just goes to show you how much censorship there is of conservatives on social media, or it's not even necessarily conservatives. It's anybody who criticizes Joe Biden or criticizes the liberal policies that they want to put in place. And one of these people is a TV host named Steve Maltzberg. Now, on his Twitter account, all he did was link to a video showing all of these women and children whose hair Joe Biden has sniffed, and, the children, how he grabs them up and kind of, is very touchy-feely with young children. It seems to particularly be with young girls that I've seen. And you've just got so many examples of this. Somebody put together a video. Well, Steve Maltzberg links to that video. And you know what Twitter does? They suspend his account for violation of child sexual exploitation policy. So wait a minute.
Let's think about this.
Are you saying that video of Joe Biden grabbing on all the children, smelling their hair, pulling them in close to him, that is child sexual exploitation? I mean, that seems to be the implications of the ban, doesn't it? Now, I'm sure they would say something else, but the point is they don't want to let any of the bad information about Joe Biden get out there, and people know about this. I mean, smart people and folks at home and at work, I mean, you see this, right? You see the way that social media is only banning conservatives, only banning criticism of Biden. You've got other criticism of Trump, people doing all kinds of things, talking about all kinds of things they shouldn't be talking about, like maybe killing him and other things like that, trying to fan the flames. You've got some of these representatives talking about fighting, unrest in the streets. You've got ISIS and Antifa accounts. All these are allowed to persist on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. Meanwhile, they're taking down any kind of criticism of Joe Biden as the media attempts to shield him and totally cover things up. And we just saw that this weekend. Saturday morning, the day after the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and remember, they had to wake him up from his nap Friday evening to come out and give a prepared speech, which if you watch that speech, I mean, he could barely get through the speech. The guy can barely speak anymore. His voice has become so soft, and his word pronunciation has become so, non-specific, that it's hard to even understand what he's saying. But he had to do that Friday evening because of the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They get up Saturday morning and they do what's called a lid. That means they announce 8:35 in the morning on Saturday, there will be no press appearances today, no interviews, no campaign stops, no nothing. Joe Biden will be doing nothing on Saturday, 6 weeks before the presidential election. I mean, does the guy want to be president? Does he? I mean, what was President Trump doing? Flying all over the country, holding rallies. The guy's up all day, gets up early in the morning, stays up late at night. He's in several states a day as he's moving around the country, holding campaign events, holding rallies, speaking to the press, off the cuff, walking out to the chopper. He's holding little mini pressers. They can ask him any questions they want. These town halls where they're ambushing him, ask him any questions they want. And he's taking all comers. He's right there. He's willing to take it. He's off the cuff, and he'll say what he thinks and say what he means. And they don't dare let Joe Biden do that because they know what's going to happen. This whole farce is going to be exposed if they allow that to happen. But you just need to think about that. Is this the kind of guy you want for president? I mean, what happens if we have a crisis in this country? What happens if we had a major terrorist attack? I mean, is Joe Biden going to be sleeping for the weekend and he'll just get to it next week when he can? I mean, is that what we're going to be dealing with? Is that the kind of person you want? Having their finger on the nuclear button? Somebody who's not all there and who really can't muster the energy to get up and do something? It's sad. It's really sad. It's sad that the Democrats are putting this kind of a person forward, and it's sad that the media isn't doing its job, and the media is just covering for him. Nobody's questioning this. They're not doing their job because they just want to get, as Kamala Harris said the other day, they just want to get the Harris administration in with Joe Biden as president. Remember, that's what she said. It'll be the Harris administration with Joe Biden as president. Not the Biden-Harris administration, not the Biden administration, but the Harris administration with Joe Biden as president.
That's an obvious slip up because that must be the conversations that take place behind the scenes. This is going to be yours, Kamala.
Yeah,
you would
right.
have to think so, right?
Right. So either that's a Freudian slip or it's even a planned slip to let people know what's going on. Hey, don't worry. We're going to put Joe in his room in the basement or whatever. We'll give him a TV. We'll give him a pacifier that he can suck on, and he'll be there. He'll be fine. But don't worry. He's really not going to be involved. He'll just be a figurehead. And somebody who can at least function in life will be the president, Kamala Harris. So you have to decide if that's what you want. Do you want Kamala Harris as your president? Most people didn't. Even the Democrats didn't want her. She's such a fake. All right, well, here's a little throwaway story for you as we get ready to go to break. I don't know if you know about this Tesla autopilot feature, but they just keep finding people who are in crashes and other situations who've had Tesla autopilot on. Well, up in Canada recently, they busted a 20-year-old man and his passenger, both of whom had their seats fully reclined and were sleeping as their Tesla rocketed down the road at, get this, 90 miles an hour while they slept. You're supposed to be sitting there looking at the road with your hands on the wheel while autopilot's on. A lot of people are watching TV and other things. These folks had the seats reclined and were sleeping. Does that make you feel safe on the roads? We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Boy, President Trump got something delivered to the White House addressed to him, and it wasn't something anybody would want to receive in the mail.
Yeah, you talk about foreign interference in our elections, right? I mean, they're making up all this stuff that the Russians are supposedly doing, and that's all the focus. Meanwhile, we've got a Canadian, and it turns out to be a Canadian woman, or at least she's the suspect. A Canadian woman mailed an envelope to the White House with ricin poison in it. Now, if you remember ricin poison, it's been used in a number of different attacks. I think it was used over in one of the Japanese. I don't remember if that was a ricin or if it was something else, but it's a very, very deadly poison. It comes from the castor oil plant, which is in Latin Ricinus communis, which I think is sort of appropriate given today's world. We got the communist plant poisoning people. Anyway, this lady apparently, and this is just alleged at this point that it was the lady, she mailed it to the White House, and Customs and Border Patrol picked her up on the way into the country shortly thereafter. So one just wonders, what was she doing? First of all, what was she doing in Canada? Is that where she lives? And more importantly, why was she coming to the U.S.? Was there more that she had planned for this story? Speaking of coming to the U.S., before we get to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we really got to keep things moving today, but we wanted to hit on something that you're really not going to hear much of in the mainstream media, and that's the current ongoing extradition trial for Julian Assange. Now, he's over in England. He's been in that Belmarsh prison for quite some time. Who knows what they've done to him with their mind-altering drugs and stuff. But as part of this story, a couple of things are coming out. His own lawyers, and apparently there's been some testimony, have said, if you remember, Dana Rohrabacher, a U.S. congressman, went over and met with Assange in 2017, and they've said that he actually conveyed an offer from President Trump that Assange could receive a pardon if he would reveal the source of the DNC leaks, which we've all long suspected to be, and even Julian Assange on one or two interviews almost seemed to say that it was Seth Rich. Now, we know the story of Seth Rich. He was killed in a robbery where nothing was taken, shot on the street in Washington, D.C. He was a big Bernie supporter, and the allegations are, and some computer forensic people have documented, that this makes the most sense for the DNC hack, not that it was an external hack, but that it was an inside job. So the allegation is he took a thumb drive, plugged it in the computer, downloaded the emails onto that, and then gave it to WikiLeaks. And like we said, Julian Assange has even said that. So apparently in 2017, or at least this is the story that Assange's lawyers are putting forward, Dana Rohrabacher, a Republican congressman, went over there and conveyed the offer from President Trump to give him a pardon if he would reveal the source. Now, the source, if it is Seth Rich, is dead. So that ends the need for source confidentiality, although WikiLeaks has this sort of overriding policy of never revealing a source, even though, again, as we said, it seemed like Assange did that in one or two interviews. But the point is, apparently, Assange turned this down. I guess he was too proud to make this deal. To me, it sounds like a great deal. And, part of me even thinks, the whole trouble he's in, he's kind of put himself there. Why didn't he just reveal his source? So I don't know what that actually means, if that means that Seth Rich wasn't his source and maybe we don't have the right story. It certainly seems like he was. Seth Rich is long dead. Why wouldn't Assange just reveal that and get the pardon?
If that's not a source, who would it be?
Yeah, who would it be? I mean, the other allegation, right, is that it was the Russians, the unnamed, unknown Russians, the evil Russians. But Glenn Greenwald's been all over this story of the Assange trial. But again, you won't hear this in the mainstream media. And Greenwald's saying, he's a journalist, as you might know, he's now with The Intercept. He broke the Edward Snowden story back in 2013. But anyway, Greenwald's been tweeting about this and putting out other content about the Assange extradition trial. And he said, this concept that Assange is not a journalist sort of leaves aside the major stories that WikiLeaks has broken over the years of government corruption, even the stories of these Hillary Clinton emails. I mean, there were some major stories in those, in the Podesta emails and others. Even just the fact that, Podesta, one of the top advisors to Hillary Clinton, would have such a weak password and almost no security on his email account, et cetera. I mean, those in and of themselves are stories of government ineptitude, maybe even corruption. But he says, look at all the stories that WikiLeaks has broken that other quote-unquote journalists haven't dared to touch. And also, look at the journalism prizes that he's won. So, I've heard a lot of people say, well, he's not a journalist, and they adopt the line that the national security state wants you to take, that he's some kind of non-state, ill-intentioned actor or something like that. Well, other people could say he's a journalist. There's no special qualification to be a journalist, is there? You don't have to go to journalism school and have a journalism degree. Is that where we're at in this country? Got to have a piece of paper on your wall? No. You have to be breaking stories. You have to be revealing things that the public wants to know, showing government corruption, things like that. That's what makes a journalist. And if that's what makes a journalist, then Julian Assange is a journalist. So
and
here
an unbiased opinion.
Yeah. So here we have.
Too?
Huh?
Is that a journalist too? An unbiased opinion? Do we have any of those?
It doesn't even have to be an unbiased opinion. But no, we don't have any more of those. We don't have any more of the Walter Cronkite reading the news type of journalism. Although some people would take a look back at some of Cronkite's work and say that he was slanted, even though he did it in a very unslanted way, at least compared to what we have today. But I'll let you even be totally opinionated and be a journalist. You're out there, you're publishing things, you're doing either revelations of facts that are important or that people are interested in, or you're doing commentary or a mix of both. And I'll say all of that is journalism, just like it was back in the founding of this republic. The leaflets and things that were printed up before the American Revolution and thereafter, done by people like Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Adams, and others. These were not unbiased commentaries, right? These people had a perspective. They were putting forward news that helped to push their agenda, and that was exactly what they were talking about in the First Amendment when they gave the freedom of the press or ensconced it in the amendment, right? It's because they didn't create that freedom. What they said was these freedoms, these rights pre-exist government saying that you have them. But the point is we're going to ensconce them so that they cannot continue to be taken away by the government. But here we have our own government prosecuting a journalist. All right, well, in the time we've got left in this segment, let's talk a little bit more about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat. And I specifically want to kind of cover the length of time, because that's being focused on, the length of time that it would take to confirm a Supreme Court justice. Another thing I think we need to cover is some of the top candidates for the spot. Now, what's been widely reported, and I've seen a number of people on Twitter talking about this, is Seventh Circuit Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who is a staunch Catholic and extremely conservative. I think she'd be a great justice. That being said, she has come out and she's said that where U.S. law conflicts with Catholic doctrine, she would actually recuse herself from deciding those types of cases because that's how strongly she identifies with and believes in Catholic doctrine. Now, that's very noble of her to be so straightforward about what she would do, but let's face it, what issue could she possibly be talking about? Maybe abortion, right? Because there's a place where current U.S. law directly conflicts with Catholic doctrine, so I guess she's saying she would recuse on any abortion cases. And I have to wonder, and this came to me over the weekend, does President Trump, let's think about what President Trump's experience has been with the concept of recusal over the last 4 years. Was there somebody that he put in a position that he needed to act in that position who recused themselves? Jeff Sessions? Was there somebody? So I wonder how the president will respond to somebody who's already said on a major issue or major issues, and we know the president is very passionate about the right to life. I wonder how he would respond to somebody who has claimed they will recuse
Where is she
themselves. She's from Chicago. So who's one of the other top candidates that's been mentioned? 11th Circuit Judge Barbara Lagoa from Miami, Florida, right? She's a first-generation Cuban-American. I think she might almost be the ideal nominee because let the Democrats try to attack a Hispanic woman in this election cycle. I mean, it's almost baiting them into political suicide, right? She's very conservative. She's got a great record. In fact, in the recent felon voting rights case, not only did she concur with the majority opinion, but then she wrote a special concurrence for an additional basis on which she said that felons should not be given the right to vote under certain circumstances, which is where they haven't paid their fines and restitution, which is part of the judgment. I mean, they say, oh, I paid my debt to society, and no, you haven't. And these are not huge debts. And remember, restitution goes to the victims. So you haven't made it right. You haven't made the people that you hurt whole. And now you want all your rights back, even though you really haven't paid your debt and you haven't completed your sentence, although you may have been let out of prison. So anyway, I think she would be a great pick, almost a masterstroke for the president in this environment. And could she be confirmed before the election? Well, if we're looking historically, timing-wise, she certainly could. And, I've highlighted here on my list, because as you can see, I've got 9 pages of all of the previous Supreme Court nominees, how long it took them to be confirmed, and other data about that. So I've got quite a bit here. Let's just start more recently. Remember William Howard Taft, President of the United States for some time, and then a Supreme Court justice. He was nominated on June 30th, 1921, and confirmed on June 30th, 1921. George Sutherland, nominated September 5th, 1922. Confirmed September 5th, 1922. Pierce Butler, December 5th, 22, nominated. December 21st, 22, confirmed. That's 16 days in the middle of the Christmas holiday. Edward Sanford, nominated January 24th of 23, confirmed January 29th, 5 days later of 23. Harlan Stone, there's a name some people may recognize, nominated January 5th, 25, confirmed February 5th, 25, 31 days later. Benjamin Cardozo, February 15th of 32 to February 24th of 32. I could go on and on. We've got an entire list here. Felix Frankfurter, January 5th, 1939 to January 17th, 1939. 12 days. In fact, since 1900, 70% of Supreme Court justices have been confirmed. The nominees were confirmed in less than 46 days. So we know the president has said he's going to wait until after Ruth Bader Ginsburg's funeral to make his nomination. That nomination will be announced Friday or Saturday of this week upcoming. So by the time we get to the next Morgan Streetman show, we'll know who the nominee is. And folks, let's fill the seat. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Boy, we've got a great out there for you today. We gave it a little bit of a tease earlier, but back on April 6, 1966, in a suburb of Melbourne, Australia, at the Westall High School, there was a UFO sighting that's one of the most famous UFO sightings, and particularly because it is completely unsolved. About 300 to 350 people, including high school students and teachers, saw a gray saucer-shaped craft about twice the size of a car descending, flying over their playground, and then landing in an area called the Grange. And strangely, some of these high school students leaped over the fence and ran out and saw this UFO. And when you hear the story about what happened to these people, it's almost unbelievable. Now, we've got a lot of clips here, so I'm going to jump right into them because I think they really tell the story a lot better than Morgan Streetman does. So let's listen here to some clips about the first sighting of this UFO.
I was precipitating various chemicals in order to make crystals, and I just happened to be looking out the window, thinking how to fudge my science report. What I saw directly south was something that I'd never seen before.
We were out playing sport on the oval. One of the kids yelled out, look up in the sky, you know, it's flying saucers. And I remember we all looked up, and it really was a flying saucer. I mean, from what you imagine, a flying saucer, it was a round silver disc, and it seemed to be very low over the school, and I remember kids screaming and running inside.
The student came in, was hysterical, leaned up against a sliding door, screaming, "There's a flying saucer in the oval." And of course everybody started to head towards the door, and the teacher said, "Sit down, it's not recess yet," and a few minutes later the bell went off.
Everyone started moving, like a whole lot of zebras being terrified by crocodiles. I went where the herd went.
These are some clips from a documentary called Westall 66, a suburban UFO mystery that aired on Australian TV in 2010, and I thought they were very interesting clips and kind of put some great flavor on this story so that you can really understand it. Now, what happened after they first saw it, that UFO flew over to the Grange? Let's listen to this.
Sort of stopped dead, and stopped dead in the air, and then it just sort of started descending straight down. And I'd say it got down about halfway up that gum tree or above the goalpost and sat there for a while, and then it just sort of lifted straight up and then just took straight off.
This thing went down behind the trees, then it came up, and it was like it had become aware of these planes coming in, and it just went woof and just left them like they were standing still.
And then it went across to an area called the Grange, which was a bit of a pine plantation behind the school.
And, you know, this is something they've never been able to explain, but here, some friends take off running after it. Tanya, and that's a name you need to remember for this story, Tanya and her friends take off.
A lot of the kids took off towards where it seemed to go, and it disappeared down behind the trees. So we all got through this fence and ran towards where it had appeared to land.
Tanya and I, and this other girl, we were over the fence. Tanya was in the lead, and we ran towards where it was coming down. I lost sight of Tanya. She was in front of me.
A couple of girls got there faster than me. I was a bit slow, and they actually passed out. And apparently it did land, because when we got there, there was a great big round patch of like flattened yellow, almost burnt, although I'm a bit sketchy on that. I can't remember if it was really burnt or whether it was just flattened, but it was sort of yellow, and the grass was all flattened in a swirly sort of a pattern.
Before I got there, the disc came back up again, so I stopped chasing it.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off, and it seemed to turn side on and just disappear into thin air.
Well, what about your friend Tanya?
I believe she did see it on the ground.
She did see it on the ground?
So I was given to believe, yes. But I went back to school, and Tanya went back to school and basically had gone all to pieces. There was definitely an ambulance on the oval, and I was told that she'd been taken away in the ambulance, and that was the last time I ever saw her.
Wow.
She was just gone, and she never came back to school.
So Tanya, who made it out to the UFO, saw it, maybe even touched it, kind of lost her mind when she got back to school. And, of course, the headmaster told everybody not to talk about it.
That afternoon, our principal called a special assembly and told us all not to talk about it.
All I know is the whole school was told off. The headmaster says, "Oh, you kids are nuts. It's a weather balloon. Don't talk about it."
Okay, now we got to get to this last clip because this is the coup de grace. What happened to Tanya? These people never saw Tanya again, but this clip, when I heard it, this freaked me out. Listen and see if you agree.
Can I ask what happened to the girl? You took her back to the school, the one that was hysterical. Is it Tanya? And she went into the hospital, and then you went to visit her at her place, and they said she didn't live there.
Yes, right. I went to her house the following day.
Listen to this.
And an English-speaking woman opened the door and said there had never been a Tanya living there. Now, the problem with that is that Tanya's parents didn't speak English to start with. I think they were Yugoslavian. So I'd been to this house a lot of times and then was told, "No, sorry, you're mistaken."
Can you believe that? So these people from school, they come back. Tanya's hysterical. An ambulance takes her off. Nobody at the school ever sees her again. And the next day, a friend of hers who'd been over playing with her at her house many times goes over to the house. Can you imagine yourself in this scenario? Particularly a little kid, you go over to a house you've been to probably, I'm going to say, dozens or hundreds of times to play. You knock on the door. The people who answer the door are very strange to you, and you say, "Well, wait a minute. Where's Tanya?" And the people say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you must be mistaken. There's never been a Tanya here." I mean, can you even imagine that? I mean, the gaslighting of trying to tell you that something that you know is not true. What do you think about that, Pat George? Doesn't that give you goosebumps?
Well, as a child, you'd be so confused, and it would not comprehend. And I mean, where's Tanya today?
Yeah, well, they don't know. Tanya's never been seen or heard from again. And this is the Westall UFO incident, very famous incident, like we told you earlier. Even skeptics acknowledge the best skeptical explanation that they can come up with for this was that it was some kind of advanced military aircraft. That doesn't sound very believable to me. I don't know what you think, but you need to look into this. There's a lot more where this came from, including other interviews and programs on this that are fascinating. Check it out. Folks, I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.